what I want to do tonight is simply introduce the concept, and I want to look at it from the lens of our culture and ask some questions about it, but also apply a bit of common sense. Okay? So I won't be going into the medieval thinking, but I will be looking at it just from a common sense point of view, and also we're going to do a bit of economics. Okay? And in fact, we're going to do the most important bit of economics that there is. And for a while, again, when I was kind of really lively about this stuff, I used to ask my graduate students that would come along to do, courseworks, masters and things. And I'd say, did you do economics as an undergraduate? And some of them would say yes. And I'd always ask them the same question. I'd say, well, what was the most important thing that you learned from economics? And they always gave me the same answer. I'm going to tell you what that answer was as we go along tonight. So there's one really, really important thing. In fact, a lot of my students, when I did this little straw poll survey, told me that there was only one thing that really sort of came away with from their economics that was useful, and that's what we're going to be looking at tonight. And that's why we're going to be using that as a window into this question of just price. We've been taking an approach with what we've been talking about of a social perspective, not socialist, but social. The idea that human beings are made to hang about with each other, and we've made a big thing about the family and all that sort of stuff. And I want to suggest that trade is part of our social nature, and it helps us to express ourselves as person, be mates with people, be friends with people. It also helps us materially to achieve the comforts that we need, because we are body and soul. And so our bodies do need a certain amount of care. Okay? So trade as exchange is a useful thing. And I'm talking about exchange of positive contributions, in that I can help you, you can help me, we're both better off. That's positive contributions. I'm giving you something useful, you're giving me something useful. Okay? There are other exchanges that we can have, where I can come along and say, I'm going to punch you in the nose if you don't, give me your shoes. Right? That's an exchange, not necessarily so positive. You might punch me back, and so we have an exchange, we have like a social relationship. Marx kind of said that that's the way that society all worked. Right? Conflict, okay? Not positive. Okay? One way or another, when we do exchange material things, I give you the shoes I make, you give me the food that you prepare or what have you. We've got the question of price, and this is going to be the first thing we're going to be looking at. And this is the question which really causes the most concern. In fact, you could say that economics is largely about the question of price, question of value. Now, you may not think that, because economists are often talking about inflation and and employment and all sorts of other things. But ultimately, they're talking about the prices of those things. And in economics, a lot of the doings has to do with working out the right price. And so we're all in that activity. So if we're thinking about just price, that's certainly something that an economist can say, yeah, I'm trying to work out the correct price. He wouldn't say just price necessarily. One way or another, price has to be some relative kind of weighting of these positive goods, positive contributions that we make to each other in exchange. We have to accept that people are both producers and consumers. And that's kind of part of our, we could be all consumers. I could just kind of sit back, feed me, clothe me, right? And if I've got some kind of power, maybe you might have to do that. Or I could be a slave, and I could be just producing and not really consuming a great deal. But by and large, in an ordered society, in a real society where people are actually treating each other with some kind of human dignity, we're going to be both those characters. Right? So we're going to look at that as we go along. The first person to really look at this question was, well, in a systematic way that we know about, was Aristotle. Aristotle, in actually a few places, There are two books of Aristotle's that are really worth getting to know, and they're very simple. They're simply called his Politics and his Ethics, Nicomachean Ethics, and they're both quite readable. And in those, you'll find lots of references to economic things. But a really important concept that Aristotle gives us is this notion, especially of natural exchange. And this is really the first systematic treatise on the fundamentals of economics that we have, to the extent that we can really say that Aristotle, as much as he was a philosopher, also gave us, if you like, the bones of economics. And you probably notice I come back to him from time to time. I think he dealt with the four fundamental principles that you need to put into any economic solution. And they have to do, last week we looked at property, this week we're looking at price, we're going to talk about money later on, and after all we're going to be looking at the question of what to do with all the extra wealth that we've got lying around. So the four principles. But Aristotle's work on property last week we saw was that unusual thing, that idea of a dual theory of property, which was inherited by the Catholic Church and other people. This week we're going to be looking at Aristotle's thinking about price, and here he's talking about exchange, and particularly this notion of natural versus unnatural exchange. One of the really unusual things about Aristotle's theory of exchange is that while it was adopted by the medieval world, people like St. Thomas and St. Bonaventure, it was largely thrown out by people with names like Luther and Calvin. We're going to get on to state regulation and so on later on. That's kind of going to haunt us all the way through. Before we get to that, I want us to think about some very basic mechanics, if you like, to this economic activity. And the very basic works like this. If I'm hungry, I need to get something to eat, and that requires work. It's very seldom that you can sit still, open your mouth, and food kind of falls into it. Any effort that you make means that there's work that you have to do. I might have to walk into the backyard and, I don't know, pick a cob of corn or something, or bring in the cat and cook it or something. I have to do some work. Now, what that means is that there's a combination of labour, which is my effort or somebody else's effort to go out and get the cob of corn or the cat or whatever it is, and then there's the stuff of, the food, right, which is the cob of corn growing out there in nature, right? Now, that has come down to us as two distinct what's called factors of production. And those two factors are labour, my effort to go out and bring in the cob of corn, and the natural thing as it exists. Let's imagine I'm not going out to the backyard where I have a crop planted, but I'm merely wandering through the wilderness plucking fruit. Okay, that just grows there. Okay? Nobody is growing the fruit, it just happens to be there. And to a certain extent, even when a farmer grows a crop of corn, a fair bit of what's happening is not the farmer's work. The farmer might systematically put the seeds in. That's fantastic. But most of the growing is done because of the seeds themselves, isn't it? And the water that falls out of the sky and the sun and all that sort of carry on. Most of what's in our food actually comes to us without human labour, even though it's enhanced by human labour. Right? We maybe multiply the amount of corn that we get by using clever human labour, using machines and all that sort of carry on. Yeah? But my point is that there is a part of these resources that we use which comes from the unmanufactured component. And by unmanufactured, manufacture is to fiddle with something with your hands. It's the way I kind of improve something by dealing with my hands, my labour. So I'm separating land and labour. This means that land here means, and I think I've talked about this previously, it means anything which hasn't had humans to help make it what it is. And they're often sort of mixtures. Right? Okay. So land can include the air, can include dirt, and can include wild fruit, wild animals, all sorts of stuff. The other thing that I'll often use while it's fundamentally a combination of the unproduced things, the unmanufactured things, plus human labour, there's also the wonderful thing that humans are able to do, which is use tools. And so if I want to grow the corn, I can get a lot more corn to grow by using a plough and using a whole lot of other stuff, maybe using fertilisers. And all of those places, what I'm doing, I spend a bit of time to make a plough. So that's a combination of maybe going out and finding some sticks and stones or whatever I do to make my plough. So I get a bit of raw materials or resources, whatever they are. Human labour, make my plough. And then my plough then multiplies the amount of corn that I'm able to produce. Because I've spent my effort making something which is not for me to eat or wear or whatever, but it helps me to produce things in the future, I refer to that type of thing, my plough, as capital. And maybe later on we might go a bit further into what is and is not capital. But land, labour and capital are these three classical factors of production. You know? Capital tends to multiply the efficiency of labour as applied to land. You know? And all of those go together to make the products that we want, whether it's the food I eat, the clothes I wear, the shelter that I kind of live in, or anything else that appeals to me. Paintings on the walls, all that sort of stuff. Okay. There's an initial question, and this is the question that kind of goes to the heart of economics. It's not the part that I want to talk about as a really big issue. But the question is, what's the balance between who gets paid how much? We talked about that a little bit last week. Remember I said, you know, if I rent somebody a farm, how much rent do I charge? Well, really, that's the juggle in there, isn't it? What's the balance in there between the benefit of the production distributed between the factors of production? Okay? That's a bit of a puzzle, because how much land is equal to a unit of labour? What are the units we're going to use? These are puzzles. I can talk about the relationship, say, between my strength and your strength, or my smartness, or somebody else's smartness and somebody else's smartness. Okay, so we can kind of relate those sort of things, but you see the problem? Land, totally different stuff. Okay. That's the first big question. And then we get the third question in there. If we're distributing between land and labour, then we've also got distribution to capital. And we've got a whole economic system, popularly known as capitalism, which a lot of people say it's extremely hard to define, but just as an approximate starting point, it would be an economic system where it's this one, the capital, that tends to be the factor of production which is in control. And JP2, when he was writing Social Encyclicals, was saying, no, that's not a very good idea. It actually should be labour that should be in control. Now, a lot of the very conservatives were then sort of saying, oh, JP2 is a socialist, and you know, we thought he didn't like the communists, but in fact he is one, all that sort of stuff, because he thinks labour should be top of the tree. We all know it should be capital, because it sort of works so well, that sort of stuff. And there's a question that we're going to have to come back to. Okay? Land, labour and capital, how do we distribute the rewards of the production between them? One way or another, there should be some form of equity. This has a lovely classical title. It's the question of distributive justice. So distributive justice is, how much rent do I charge? Okay. Or how much should I pay for the plough? Or should the plough be something which takes a regular, permanent, and perhaps even growing percentage of my crop each year? So these are questions which are very practical questions in economics today. And so we're going to have to look at this question of distributive justice. And again, back in St. Thomas's day, the question was distributive justice. Most people say, oh yeah, I know what you're talking about with that. Very, very important. Our industrial relations is really a question of distributive justice. It hasn't gone away, just that we've forgotten how to really focus on it to solve the problem. There's another aspect though, and that is, if I produce something, I might be a farmer or a factory owner or what have you, how do I ensure justice between the balance of the value of the thing produced and what the consumer pays for it. This is a question which occupied Marx's mind a fair bit, and he came up with a very unusual solution to it. But this question remains, even if he got the question wrong, you don't walk away from the question. What we're aiming to do is get the right answer to it. Okay? There are two kind of approaches. Marx would say that it's a massive problem. We ought to destroy the system and have a worker revolution. The other side, the liberal side, would say there's no problem there. Don't worry about it. It'll fix itself. Okay? So they were kind of the two poles. Both of them ignore the opportunity for moral deliberation over the question of justice with respect to this transfer of price from the production system over to the consumer. So we'll come back to commutative justice later on. Or maybe not that far later on. I'm going to get us to think about the question of price by kind of constructing the idea of value. And I want us to spend a little bit of time thinking about this question of value. We use the word value all the time. Something is valuable to me. I value my Australian citizenship. I also value the lawnmower, maybe in different ways. And when I go down to Bunnings to buy myself a new lawnmower, I have to ask myself the question, is the, I don't know, $300, $500, whatever a lawnmower costs, is it worth it to me? Is it good value to me? Okay. So this is the notion that we have to start with. And to a certain extent, I go down to the hardware store to buy my lawnmower or a new lawnmower only when I consider that it will be valuable to me to have a lawnmower or a bottle of wine or a new pair of boots or whatever it is. So we need to ask ourselves, what's this question of value? I think we skipped over the idea of goods a little while ago. And I'll just come back to it because value has a lot to do with goods. I would say that a good thing is something that enhances my life. I could distinguish goods into physical goods, perhaps intellectual goods, moral goods. And so justice and peace might be moral goods. A full tummy is a physical good. A lawnmower is a physical good. It's a lot easier than going out with a pair of tweezers or something to go and cut the grass. Yeah. And we can sort of talk about these other types of goods. So value, a good is a concept which is important because it's a measure that we use to evaluate a thing's contribution to the quality of our life. Here we are, body and soul and all the rest of it. Often we'll be looking at our material body. Value is a measure of goodness. So I've got a good lawnmower, starts first time, cuts the grass really well. I've got a nice big, whatever else you want for a lawnmower, big grass catcher. That's a good lawnmower. Might have a seat on the back so I don't have to stand up. That's a very good lawnmower. It's got great value to me. We could say that value is the usefulness to the user. To a certain extent, it's a property of the consumer. Now, last week we were talking about properties. And we're talking about the idea that a property is something that I have to be in order to be myself. So, is the lawnmower a good lawnmower? Or is my appreciation of it, the thing which it will do for me, the thing which is good? The thing which makes it valuable? In a very real sense, my selection of my lawnmower will very much depend on my situation. My brother has got a lawnmower. He might think it's a lot better than mine. You can sit on it. Yeah. I don't think it's a very good lawnmower because you've probably seen my lawn out there. By the time I started his lawnmower, I'd have the job done. The thing is really big and it uses a lot of petrol and it's very expensive, Right? So a good lawnmower for me is a little thing which I can hide down the side of the house It's fairly lightweight because I've got a wild bit of topography out there. Yeah. But for him, I think he's got 15 acres. My lawnmower is not good at all. Very low value. And we can apply that to many other things as well. I don't like the idea of beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but there is something in my needs which is in me, which I then project out into the way that I evaluate the things that are around me. Yep. So we have to kind of do a little bit of battle with that. I don't want to take that too far. I think we can accept, though, that value is really measured in terms of usefulness to me. There are things which, you know, if I was deaf, a couple of tickets to the opera wouldn't really do me a lot of good. They'd have no value to me. But for a lot of other people, they'd be really, really delightful. Okay. So it's a property of the consumer. It's a benefit. It contributes to the quality of my life. To a certain extent, value is what I call a positive concept. If I think of something as valuable, I think, whoa, isn't that wonderful? I've got a valuable bottle of wine. Why is it valuable? It has this sort of nice, you know, good kind of connotation to it. And I mention that because we're now coming to the question of cost. If something costs me dearly, negative concept. The lawnmower cost me $1,000 because it sort of ran over the dog and I had to take it to the vet or something. And because it was a ride-on mower or something and I couldn't stop it. It's a costly thing to have. Might be, you know, have certain benefits. You see the notion of cost? Now, if cost and value are kind of balanced, I don't worry too much. Right? If I get myself a BMW motor car or something, it's nice, brand new, and that's wonderful, and it has value to me because I just feel wonderful showing myself off as I drive down the road and all that. And it's cost me, I don't know, $80,000 or something, and it's kind of costly. And it's kind of balanced. I'm happy. But I'd really prefer to have something which is valuable but cheap compared to something which is costly and not very valuable. Getting your teeth fixed, for instance, you know, very costly sometimes, certainly not a pleasant experience. It is kind of valuable to you, but hey, I mean, I don't notice my teeth most of the time. So I take them for granted, so I don't really value them much. I only value them when they start to ache. And there are a lot of things like that. So what's cost? I would say cost, though, apart from being a negative concept, is really the difficulty of acquiring something. The cost of getting my teeth fixed is how much I have to pay the dentist. The cost of having that fancy lawnmower that's run over the dog is the difficulty, the inconvenience of having the thing. Right? Now, largely in economics, the inconvenience of having something is the inconvenience of bringing it to me. And so the cost of something is usually in terms of the land, labour and capital that you have to put into action in order to get the stuff that I want. So if I want a nice baked dinner, I'm going to have to get farmers and who knows what else to make all the bits and pieces that go into that lovely, valuable thing. There's a cost in there. Generally, I will only accept something if its value to me is greater than its cost. We talk about cost-benefit analysis. No, it's fairly straightforward. And so as long as there's a nice positive gap, as you can see there in the diagram that we have, I will buy that. Okay, if somebody is manufacturing something, so the market, the maker or the supplier is making something and they put a cost on it, let's say it's this cup. Let's say the cups cost somebody $1 to make it. By the time you add up the cost of the clay which is in it, the design which is in it, the effort which is in it, the risk that the manufacturer has to take to do it, and he can make these, he's probably making millions of them, and at $1 a piece, all of his costs are covered. Okay? But from my point of view, it's got such a marvellous design on it, and I just really fell in love with the shape. It's fantastically valuable. I would be willing to pay $10 for this. So its value to me, one way or another, is $10. The cost of it is $1. If I see it in the shop, will I buy it? I probably will, right? Because its value to me exceeds the cost. If I saw it in the shop, it's got a value to me of $10, but the tag on it says $25, it's in some fancy gift shop or something, I'd say, oh yeah, that's a really nice cup, I'd really like that cup, but for $25, it doesn't work. So as long as the use value to the end user exceeds the cost, which is what comes from the supplier, then we will have trade. Okay, if you're making the cups and I see the cup, you can make it for $1, I want it for 10, I'll buy it from you, won't I? You'll be happy because you're selling your cups. I'm happy I'm getting the cups. Right? That's marvellous. Okay. The next question, though, is this third concept of price. So far on our little diagram here, we've got a bit of a range here between what the cost is, that's $1, and what the value is, which we're saying is $10. And the question is, what's the price? What's the answer? Any suggestions?
As in, would be the net value in currency, or both the use value and the cost of the product.
Yeah, could be.
Plus more.
Yeah. Okay, I'll tell you what. Will the price be $12? No. Right? Because it won't be more than my use value. I'll be so, well, nice cup, but it's not worth it. Right? Will the price be 50 cents? No. So I know it's going to be between 1 and 10. The point is, oddly enough, there's no answer to that. Now we're getting close to this key concept in economics that is very, very, very important. Okay, because we don't have an answer there. We need to think through a little bit more. We've seen that we've got these two limits, if you like, the upper limit and the lower limit, but we really don't have resolution of it. These are kind of important ideas. Let's flesh that out a little bit. Let's look at an example of what happens when we get close to the limits. If my enjoyment, if I could really understand my enjoyment of it, and I knew my enjoyment of it was exactly $10, if I bought it for $10, would there be any net good to me? I've got $10 of enjoyment, I've paid $10 for it. In a sense, am I better off for having the cup or not having it? Now, our thinking, it sort of confuses us in our culture, but the answer actually is no. Because in acquiring the cup, I've given away all of its benefit. I'm getting $10 worth of benefit from the sheer delight of having the thing, but I've given away that $10 of delight. Okay? So in a sense, up here is exploitation. Let's look at a more extreme example. I'm, go out with Justin and we go hunting out in the bush. In fact, we go to the other side of the Berg and we're out in the Never Never, going across the Nullarbor Plain or somewhere, and the truck breaks down. Yeah. And out there, you tend to get a bit thirsty. Sun shines down, it's very hot, and we run out of, I don't know, brake fluid to drink or whatever else there is. And someone comes along and they say, hello, you look a bit thirsty. I've got a glass of water here. What's it worth to you? A lot of value. Right? We're getting very thirsty by this stage. The buzzards, or they don't have buzzards in Australia, but the goannas or whatever it is that sort of eats people when they die, is out there. It's sort of just circling around, or the witchetty grubs, whatever they do. Right? They're all sort of closing in. Right? And I'm thinking, whoa, that glass of water looks mighty, mighty attractive. In fact, that looks really, really valuable. And the person says, well, I'll give it to you for $10,000. I say, yeah, cheap. $50,000? Cheap. I'd like to live. I'll sell him a house. Because selling him a house is a lot better than dying. Get the idea? Now, in that case, the price is being set pretty close to this upper limit. In fact, I don't even know what the upper limit is, because the upper limit is my life, and I reckon I kind of, there's not much I would hold back from in order to do that. The cost Oh, I know, it might cost 20 cents for somebody just happened to be driving past in his four-wheel drive having a bit of a trip, and he's got the esky going and he's going to give me a glass of water. Cost, not that high. Would I think that would be a honourable way to do trade? What's a word that we might use for describing that situation? Exploitation. Yeah. Now, you don't really have to be an economist to work that one out, I don't think. Okay? But it's a very simple place where when the price of something gets close to the upper limit of value, the usefulness to the consumer, we get exploitation. When we get closer down here to the lower limit, what happens? Well, the lower limit, first of all, we have to nuance this a little bit by looking at what we're talking about with cost. And we're going to be talking about introducing the idea of normal cost, which we might look at in a bit more detail as we go along. But for now, we'll just say the costs here include all of the costs in order to make the cup and earn an income for the manufacturer's family, and all of the risks that might be included. Okay, all the costs involved. Right? Not to make an absurd amount of profit so they can live like a king, but just enough so that they can live appropriate for their station in society. Okay? So cost is not, I've kind of bought this thing from eBay for $1, I'm selling it to you for eBay, selling it to you for $1, right? Because then I'd be making no profit and I would go out of business, right? And I wouldn't be able to feed my family. I need to do that, especially if all I do all day is trade cups. So I need to have a little bit of a margin in there to earn what's called a normal income. And so cost, okay, by the way I'm defining it, I think you can see where I'm going here, that if I sell it for that $1, and the dollar does enable me as the seller to make a comfortable income, right? And in fact, I'm not worse off. In fact, I live comfortably selling it at that $1. And you certainly do nicely, assuming that I'm selling it to you. You would be prepared to pay the $10 for it, but hey, you would like to pay $1. $1's better than $10 when you're shelling out. Okay. So this one's exploitation. Up the top is exploitation. Down the bottom, actually everybody's happy. I've got a nice, stable kind of business. You've got a cup which, leaves you with $9 worth of pleasure. That kind of thinking, goes back to Aristotle. The problem with using those terms is it makes it too easy to see what's going on. Adam Smith came along, our Enlightenment economist, father of classical economics, father of modern economics, came along and he gave us some different terms which helped, I think, ultimately not to inform the question, but in fact to obscure it. And so rather than talking about value, he talks about use value. Rather than talking about cost, he talks about cost value. And instead of talking about price, he talks about market value. And today we tend to use that term just about everything. What's the value of such and such? What's the market value? If we go down the street and buy ourselves a cup, we'll see it in the shop, we would say, well, what's the market value of cups? Well, what we're actually saying is what's the price of cups? My line of business in property valuation. In America, at least, they don't call property valuers valuers the way they do in Australia. They call them appraisers because they're appraising price. They're guessing price. In Australia, we use the British tradition, which comes from the Adam Smith tradition, of calling everything value, and we've got ourselves into a dreadful muddle as a result. And so we've got use value, cost value, market value comes from the Enlightenment, and as I say, it doesn't really help clarify the question. I'd like to continue using value, cost and price as we go through looking at this. Now, we've already talked about normal cost here, and that's pretty much just defining what we mean by that term. And so we won't waste time going through any further. We've also looked at the question of exploitation and the idea of an ideal price. Now, in general though, while we can understand conceptually that the further up the value column we go, the more and more exploitation is built into it, it's not always practically possible to sell everything at its normal cost of production. It's for a whole lot of reasons. And so in practice, we tend to find that price tends to hover somewhere in the middle there. It might be $2 for a cup, might be $5, all that sort of stuff. That gap between the actual price and the normal cost, the green panel, is what's called economic rent. And so if I buy the cup for, let's say, $5, I'm happy because I would have been prepared to pay 10 for it, and at 10 I just buy it because I really need it, but I'm not really that pleased when I get home, right? At $1 I'd be ecstatic. At $5, yeah, it's fine, it's worth it. Yeah? So I'm kind of happy, I'm not complaining, I'm not going to go to the government or beat up on somebody. Okay. And the manufacturer, he could afford to run his business quite happily on $1, has got 5, so he's definitely ecstatic. And that gap, that other $4, is called economic rent in our world. In general, we find that most prices have some level of economic rent in them. And the trick when you're a manufacturer is to maximize your economic rent without the community kind of rebelling and getting the government to, do something to you. Now, we've got the question of how do we justify big economic rents? And the manufacturers would like to maximize the economic rents, whereas they know that just from common sense, what we'll be looking at this afternoon or this evening, economic rents are in fact a bit of a bad deal because they get people to pay more than they really should and more than is ideal. And so to understand this mechanism, we have got this very, very important concept in economics, and this is the biggie. When I ask my students, what was it from your economic studies that you found most useful in practice and most practical and all the rest of it? They say supply and demand, the theory of the market. It answers all. And in fact, so much of economic conclusions, regardless of whether we're talking about unemployment or what to do with taxation or something, ultimately comes down to these little crisscross diagrams of the market, supply and demand. Now, there's a lot to this, and I'll really only be kind of introducing it tonight, but I just want to kind of go through the way that the market theory is supposed to work. I've got this crisscross of supply and demand, and you've all seen it. And generally, when we've got these crisscross lines, there's the assumption that when you get a price which kind of is in the middle there, right, demand is the line that comes from the buyer, supply is the line that comes from the seller, and somehow when they agree, which is that intersection point, happy. Take that a little bit further. I was in a sort of conference in Cambridge, in England, some years ago, and one of the curious things was, in this lecture hall, and lovely timber panels and that sort of stuff. It was quite a new building, and certainly compared to most of Cambridge. And they had these glass panels in these doors going into the lecture theatre, and etched into the glass of these doors into this auspicious lecture hall was this diagram, the supply and demand of the market. I thought, whoa, this is really important. I'm on hallowed ground here. It's really, really important. How's it supposed to work? Well, first of all, anytime you have a demand curve, which is the different prices people are willing to pay depending on how plentiful things are in the marketplace, you've got a demand curve. And likewise, you've got a supply curve, which is what suppliers will tend to put price tags on depending on how much stuff is in the market. So, for instance, like with mobile phones, new iPhone comes out. Not very many of them in the market. They come on with a high price. when there's millions of them in the market, or everybody's buying Androids or something, then lots of them in the marketplace, so the price goes down, right? And that is the supply curve. So it's crisscross curves, very, very common. Where you get those two curves intersecting, at that point, the sellers are willing to accept the price for that particular quantity. The buyers are willing to pay that price for that particular quantity. And so we say the market clears. And so as many things are being trucked into the marketplace per day, per year, per month, whatever, are being purchased and taken away. A bit like down at Woolies. You know, I go past Woolies on the way to Mass every morning, and these big semi-trailers kind of pulling up, right? And they're sort of delivering things by the pallet load. That's the supply. And every evening, there's just all these little wheelie trolleys kind of going out in people's boots of their cars and stuff. And the market's clearing. You never find Woolies with piles and piles of unsold stuff, and you don't find them with empty shelves. Okay? So the market is just nicely balanced. Okay. That looks nice, and we're happy with that. Except that that intersection point is not necessarily the ideal price, because that intersection price will have an economic rent, because the intersection of supply and demand does not necessarily mean that things are trading for the normal price, the normal cost of production. Okay? So the market will clear, but it may contain economic rent. The error, or the excess, the gap between the normal cost of production and the imperfect price, the price at that intersection point, okay, that gap is measured by the economic rent, and to a certain extent, that's the amount of what's called imperfection in the marketplace. Now, in economic theory, we assume perfect markets, and we're going to have to look at what a perfect market is shortly. A perfect market is a place where there's no economic rent. How do we get that? We get that because, in theory, competition will cause things to happen. If you start off with an imperfect price and lots of economic rent, that will mean that other suppliers will come along and they'll say, oh, there's a lot of money to be made here. So they'll come along and offer to sell stuff and try and get a bit of the market, and to do that they'll lower their price, lower their price, lower the price, and people will come back, and you know, the Coles and Woolies will sort of argy-bargy and do this price war, and the price will come down, and so the supply curve will move a bit. Also, when people get a bit savvy, okay, now I love this AliExpress. There's a part of me that thinks I'm probably ruining the Australian economy by buying this extraordinarily cheap stuff from China, but it's there. You know, a couple of years ago, didn't know about it, and so I'd go down to, I don't know, JCar Electronics to buy some little whiz-hoodle thing for my iPhone or something. Now I buy it on AliExpress, and it costs less to have it imported from China than the petrol to go over to, I don't know, the local, you know, iPhone shop. So as a buyer of things, I'm becoming a bit smarter, and so I'm looking for other opportunities, and so demand will change as well. So an informed purchaser, or a bunch of purchasers, will eventually also drag the price down. And so new suppliers coming into the market, and also more savvy buyers, will tend to compete the price down. And so we're all the time talking about competition. Competition is supposed to solve the problem of price by effectively forcing the price down to something very close to, hopefully ideally identical to, the normal cost of production. That's economic theory. Now you know. A couple of little wrinkles though. At the point where you have a perfect market price, prices will be happening at the normal cost of production, but also the supplier knows what the market's like, and so the supply curve will actually follow the normal cost of production line. I won't go into how that's constructed, but also the purchasers will. So in a perfect market, you'll have that lovely stability, that, I won't say equilibrium because that's an economic term, but this this peace almost in the marketplace, because everyone knows the circumstances and everyone wants to play by that. That largely comes as a result of a number of things happening in the marketplace, at least according to economic theory. They include things like you have to have lots and lots of suppliers in order that they will be competing with each other. You also have to have lots and lots of buyers, because again, they have to be able to be mobile. You have to have people who don't have to buy. If I'm like the person needing the water out in the desert, I don't really have a lot of choice whether I buy water or not. I just need it. Yeah? And so there's this assumption that nobody actually needs anything. Now, a little while ago, we were talking about Homo economicus. This was a couple of weeks ago. Now, Homo economicus has got the advantage that it wouldn't pay a lot of money for water out in the desert, because Homo economicus doesn't have flesh and blood, doesn't die. Right? Human beings aren't like that. We're not as smart as we need to be able to make these kind of decisions. We're not smart, we're not mobile, we're not indifferent, there aren't enough of us, and in practice we often find that one side of the supply or demand equation is bigger and stronger than the other, and so you don't have the balance. So for lots and lots of reasons, we actually never get to this effect. Okay? Economics is all on the assumption that we get down to this price, and then we can believe economic theory, because whatever economic theory predicts once you got at that price will actually give you good economic policy. However, if it's not happening, if you have any of these imperfections, you have real people rather than Homo economicus, you have imbalance in the numbers of people or their indifference or what have you, you won't have a perfect market. But a perfect market does have the advantage that it will force prices to be at that optimum. That's at least the theory of it. And that gives you perfect market, competitive price, and efficient market, all expressions meaning more or less the same thing. Now I want to change horses a little bit. That's modern economic theory, and that's the way it solves the problem. And you'll notice it brings price down to the normal cost of production by the external force of the market. It's not by the choice of the buyer or the seller. The seller would like to sell for more, the buyer would like to buy for less. They're actually forced by competition. Yeah? Just one little aside. If somebody is forced to do something, is the thing that they do, therefore, an exercise of their own moral action? Okay, if you are forced to walk a little way across the road or to shoot somebody, does that mean you're a good bloke or a bad bloke because you did those things? It's not. So in a curious sense, the market that we've been looking at actually has no morals to it, because the actors inside it are not acting morally, even if they do good things or bad things or whatever they do, because the market forces are actually on their back forcing them. So the curious thing about the market is that it achieves supposedly a moral outcome, which is good for society, the common good, but it does it by preventing the actors, the buyers and the sellers, from acting morally. Nobody in a perfect market acts morally. It's actually based on the assumption that people can't do it anyway. Okay, I want to now jump away from all that. I want to go back to Aristotle. Aristotle believed that people could make moral decisions, I think. Seems to be all the way through his moral deliberations, or even his political deliberations. He approached this question of exchange in a completely different way. He approached it by saying, let's have a look at the basic need that's here. I might need a cup, you might need shoes. And so the exchange that we're likely to make is that I will give you the shoes that I have over, and you'll give me the cups that you have over. We'll both be better off. Okay? And he introduced this delightfully simple, almost quaint notion of equality. And you'll find that equality is a really big thing in the ancient philosophers. Plato uses it a lot. It sort of lurks behind Aristotle a lot. He's not saying how you do equality just yet, but certainly this notion of equality is really important. And so the idea is, if you give me cups that equal shoes, we're both happy, and if you like, there's a balance there, a moral balance. If there's inequality, then there is something kind of going wrong with that exchange. One of us is exploiting the other. Okay, so if I give you, what am I giving you? I'm giving you shoes, and I give you only half as many shoes as the cup is worth, I'm stealing from you. That's kind of fairly easy to understand, isn't it? Yeah. So we've got to have this balance. And so basic exchange, which is a social thing, helps us, all that stuff, is based on equality. As well as that, Aristotle recognized that in practice, it might not quite be as simple as the cobbler exchanging with the potter between shoes and cups. It's far more complex kind of set of exchanges that we need in society. We need to exchange. Some people have got clothes that they want to sell. They want houses and they want food. And the people that are producing the food will want the clothes and the houses and and it all gets kind of very complicated. And so we need some intermediary in there to be able to mediate this exchange of commodities, especially when you've got to do intermediate exchanges to go and get what you really want. But it's all based on equality. Aristotle said that the medium of exchange that we use is money. And the idea is that while I might really want a meat pie, I might have cups. You might want cups. No, I've got cups. You might have shoes over. I'll give you my cup so that I get your shoes, because I know that over here there's a chap who's got meat pies who really need shoes. All right, and I can sort of go around trying to work all that out all the place, and it'll take a long time. It would be far easier if I give you the cup, you give me some money, which is the value of the cup, instead of equal value in shoes. And then I go along with the money, buy the meat pie, I'm happy. Right? So in a sense, the cup goes to where it needs to go, the meat pie goes to where it goes, and we can sort of circle around. That's kind of pretty obvious. You know? Now, again, we stay with the notion of equality. And that gives us the idea that money is the medium of exchange. Now, you've heard that expression many, many times, but it's got a power that most of the time we ignore. Right? It's the middle term. The social optimum is where the eventual balance of the commodities, which are at either end of this equation, are equal. Yeah, okay, what are you making a big thing about? You know, right? But really, that's what we want to be able to do. I want to be able to sort of go to sleep at night, feeling that I can go to bed at peace, thinking I haven't ripped anyone off, by thinking that the cups that I've sold today are in fact equal to the meat pies that I've eaten. Otherwise, I might feel guilty, okay, because I've been stealing, and I don't want to be, stealing. And when you get into the economy, it gets really complicated because I don't even know who I'm stealing off. Have I charged too much for my cups? Anyway. But it's kind of, at this stage, we'll just look at this notion of equality. The equality between the commodities, even though I use money as the medium of exchange. The nice thing about it is that it encourages community, and I would say that it encourages trust and material efficiency. Why does it encourage trust? If I'm selling my shoes to somebody I'm selling my cups for a fair price, you don't need to be concerned about what I'm doing if you know that I'm selling them for a fair price. You don't need to go and check out the price of 5 different potters. And likewise, when I go to buy the meat pies, I don't have to check yours out and go across to Coles and down to Woolies and all that sort of stuff. I simply go to the first one. I don't even have to know very much about pies, because I know that you're an honourable man and you're going to be sort of selling me your pies for what they're worth in money, And so I don't have to know anything about it. I don't have to waste time. You know, that trust is really useful. It's kind of the opposite of what you get when something else happens and you have to go around and do all this checking out all the time. And we'll get onto that as we go along. Okay. Look at the structure here. I'm going to change the structure a little tiny bit because I'm going to look at what a merchant does. Because I would say, or Aristotle said, that some exchanges don't start with a commodity with the object of ending with an equal commodity. They actually start with money. Works like this. I wake up in the morning and I've got a little bag of gold under my bed, and I go out and I suss out what's happening around the place, and I spend my money to buy something, right, with the intention of carting it around and finding someone who's willing to pay me more for that. And so my aim is to start off with my little bag of money, turn it into a commodity, which I intend to turn into another bag of money later on in the day. And what do you know about the bag of money at the end of the day compared to the bag of money at the beginning of the day? It'll be bigger. And that's my whole object. My whole object doesn't really care about the commodity I use. It could be roofing iron today, it could be lawnmowers tomorrow, it could be rocket ships the day after. It doesn't really matter. As long as I find situations where I start off with a little bag of money and I finish with a big bag of money. Right? And Aristotle said that's very common. However, there's a problem. I start off, the money is turned into a commodity with this equality. And then the commodity is turned into the other bag of money with an equality. Is there a problem with that? Well, the problem, fairly obviously, is that it can't be two equalities because the whole purpose of this game is inequality. Somewhere along the way, the commodity somehow has two values. Aristotle said that's unnatural. That violates equality. And if you know me well, I think equality is a lovely way to work out your moral thinking for a lot of things. I use equality to show why telling lies is naturally immoral. And you can do that simply with an equal sign. Here, we're seeing something which starts to look kind of creepy when you first, whoa, this is a bit of a surprise. Looks the same. CMC versus MCM dash. But it changes. I used to do exercises with my students where I'd give them little case studies. Just imagine you're on a desert island and you're kind of a tribe, and you do some exercise. I'm actually thinking you do it with you guys. But we won't sort of go into that, just to sort of get a feel for what this natural versus unnatural exchange is. The thing about natural exchange is that it encourages trust, it encourages efficiency, because you tend to be exchanging on the basis of natural costs, like normal costs. You don't have to waste time ferreting around checking things out. You don't have to be concerned about being ripped off, right? Because you know the intention at every point is to trade on equality. It means the person accepting the money or setting the price is setting it on the basis of what the thing is worth. Right? Turns out that question of what thing is worth becomes a bit of a big question mark, but we'll resolve that as we go along, maybe next week. However, this one is a real worry. It's governed by inequality. How do you actually do it? Do you do it by a set of relationships that are based on trust and honesty? Well, remember, I started off with a little bag of money in the morning, and I sort of ran around the place. What am I actually looking for? People who do not know the value of the commodities and willing to pay less for them than they're worth. So I'm looking for people that don't know what things are worth so that I can exploit them. I can get the better of them. And if they knew better, they'd sell it to me for more. That's the relationships I'm setting out to do. So all of my relationships, are they relationships based on equality and respect? Hardly. And when I get my commodity and I turn it back into the big bag at the end of the day, again, what am I looking at doing? Some dummy who is willing to pay more for stuff than it's really worth. I've got a friend who is he's an advisor for agricultural industries. He specialises in beef cattle up in Queensland. And he talks about what he calls the bigger fool theory. And he reckons that beef cattle properties up in Queensland right now are vastly overvalued. And he says the only reason that it works is that because people come in who are a bit foolish and pay too much for their cattle property. They work it for a few years, lose a lot of money, sometimes they go bankrupt, but they hope that they can find a bigger fool to go and sell their property to when they leave. And if you can find a bigger fool, in other words, they sell the property for more than they bought it for, they get out and they haven't been skinned too seriously, right? There's this bigger fool theory. Right? You're actually looking to exploit the next bloke. Now, when you think about that, the social relations are very, very unusual. They're very different. No longer are you meeting somebody, so you can look at them in the eye. Right? You have to practice being able to look them in the eye while you're lying to them. Right? Is that social? Is that the way that, the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost relate in the Trinity? Hardly. It's something you have to cringe from. This is getting us close to this notion of just price. It's curious that these days we have a different emphasis in what people do when they go to university and study. In the olden days, when I was a boy, people tended to go to university to study science, engineering, maybe liberal arts, all because they wanted to do good things and do good things for society, and they had this naive trust that by doing all this good stuff, they would live comfortably and be able to care for their families. Because they had this naive idea that the world worked in terms of natural exchange, where if you did really well for yourself and maybe invented a better mousetrap or became better at teaching English literature or whatever it was, the community would pay you the right kind of fair price for what you contributed to the community, and the whole world would go along. And there's that sort of naive confidence in that trust of a community kind of relationship. Okay. What occupies most people's thinking when they're considering what university course to do today? You find a lot of people doing engineering today, liberal arts, the sciences. How's that compare to business studies? Huh? What's business studies all about? Let's go through some aspects of it. Let's look at public relations. Public relations, and by the way, that's a polite term for advertising, was started by a chap by the name of Edward Bernays. He was a nephew of Sigmund Freud, the notable so-called psychiatrist. Freud, for my sins, I had to study him in great detail for a while. He was a rogue. Bernays wasn't far behind him, and basically his public relations is a way of hoodwinking people, getting them to believe stuff which is not true in order to make money out of them. And that occupies a lot of people's attention because you think, well, if I'm more effective at this advertising business, then my business will do well, and I'll get a nice big pay rise, everything's happy. It's all based on unnatural exchange, because that first bullet point is all about looking for the bigger fool. And in fact, cultivating the bigger fool by getting people to think when they go out to buy a toothbrush, they simply don't buy something which cleans their teeth. They buy something which has got a picture of, I don't know, a film star on it or something. Or when you're a kid, it'll be, whatever. So you pay more for the toothbrush than what the thing's really worth. And you want to be seen wearing the right brand of shoes or having the right smelly stuff under your arms or something, right? And you're made to feel as though you're a second-rate person if you don't have it. And you're all the time aiming, like doing public relations, of creating this illusion of happiness, or actually an illusion of unhappiness, in the community in order to make money out of them, in order to exploit them. It occupies an awful lot of people's smarts these days. The object is fostering unnatural demand and then charging the customers for the benefit of using it. Okay? And you can read the rest of that. You know, it's seldom organised towards true information. And I find, and now my university is all talking about their brand. I think, whoa, this is weird. Right? We're not talking about the quality of what we're doing. We're talking about how popular we can project ourselves. We're creating an illusion, which is, you know, something that Machiavelli would be quite proud of, but in a sense is quite inhuman. It all comes down to having a community which is focusing more and more on unnatural exchange rather than natural exchange. And so we're turning into a community which celebrates exploitation rather than, say, the earlier, you know, what people were doing just after the Second World War, where people were going to universities and TAFEs and so on to learn to become engineers and scientists. Okay, so there's that you know, change of emphasis. So you can see that this little change between natural and unnatural exchange goes back to Aristotle, has tremendous effects on far more than simply what I sell my cup to you for. It changes the whole character of your culture, because your best and brightest are no longer becoming scientists, they're becoming confidence men. Okay. And I think we've talked about that kind of change. You see, and if you look, you can see that in history, like in our history, in living history. We've seen that change. I think it's actually been coming through our culture now for the last 500 years, and I would like to suggest that the rot started with the beginning of modernity. And when Max Weber suggested that capitalism was a product of the Protestant Revolution, the Protestant religion, I don't think he was far off the mark, as much as he has his critics. Something about Protestantism does encourage this approach to liberal market work, where it ultimately becomes quite unnatural in its relationships with other people. I think we might leave that now, because to get on to the guilds will take us into something that really deserves a lot more time than we've got. But what I've aimed to do is at least alert us to the problem, okay? And to see trade and price as potentially moral. We haven't answered the question yet. We've simply raised an awareness that there is a moral dimension to it, and it goes a long way further than simply the matter of what I sell some little thing for. It actually goes right to the heart of our culture. And I think it goes to that heart in ways that we haven't had a chance to even start to scratch at yet. But it's mighty, mighty important. And we'll finish there.